Well, Razorback fans, we know that football is in full swing with fall camp. Basketball has a lot of interest, but let's be honest. Razorback Baseball may be the most consistent sport Arkansas has, and it's a 24/7, 365 sport. So let's talk about it on today's Locked On Razorbacks podcast.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Razorbacks podcast. I am your host, John Neighbors, and I am very excited, as we talked about yesterday, and announcing Curtis Wilkerson being a part of the Locked On Razorbacks podcast with the Pod at the Palace edition. We also have Andrew Ellis, who is joining me today for the BAUMBASTIC edition of Locked On Razorbacks. And it's good to be able to talk some baseball, even though it's the sport that's furthest away. But Andrew, it's going to be fun. Still talking some baseball, fall ball coming up, all that fun stuff here in the early part, mid-August, somewhere in there.
Yeah, man, the last time that you and I spoke into microphones about Arkansas baseball, a lot has changed since then. Arkansas, I believe, was still in the NCAA tournament at that point, so a lot has really changed. But there's been a lot of roster moves, a lot of MLB draft is always crazy, the portal, and so, a lot to catch up on, man, but I'm happy to be here to do it.
Yeah, it's going to be fun too. And I know, since you kind of brought up the MLB draft, one of the things that we were going to discuss today was just, one thing that you can say about Arkansas is that postseason hasn't exactly gone well for Arkansas the past couple of years. But regular seasons have gone great. The SEC placing, SEC West, that's all gone great. But also the MLB draft has been really good to Arkansas, and not only getting dudes drafted, but getting them in good situations for a lot of good money, which is a great recruiting tool for Dave Van Horn.
Yeah, and we don't have to go through all of the complexities of the MLB draft, because I feel like of the three major sports, it's by far the most chaotic and weird and hard to comprehend. I mean, you've got players on your own team that are draft eligible. You've got your incoming signing class from the high school ranks. They're also draft eligible. You have some players who, nowadays might want to stick around. They might get drafted and still decide to come to school, might be in school, get drafted, and then come back either way. So the MLB draft is always a weird time of year where you can kind of talk yourself into anything, but and there's always so many variables that go into it with all those things that I just detailed for you. But I feel like for Arkansas, I wouldn't say it couldn't have gone better, but I would say that realistically, expectations this year's MLB draft could have gone a lot of different ways, and the way it played out for Arkansas, in my opinion, was about as well as it could have. They were able to hang on to a lot of their top draft eligible returning players like a Kendall Diggs, almost their entire high school signing class, which we somewhat expected. I mean, last year at this time, Arkansas got completely gutted by the MLB draft, but we knew that was coming. They had the number one class in the country, and we knew they had a lot of players talented in that draft that would potentially start their pro careers. But Arkansas only loses one guy, Tyson Lewis, from their signing class. And you just look at who Arkansas got drafted. I mean, Hagen Smith goes number 5 overall to the Chicago White Sox. Sure, you would have liked to have Hagen Smith for another year, but I think everyone in the entire country, and maybe even out of the country, knew Hagen Smith was going to be a top pick. And I feel like that stuff is good for your program. I think it's a big deal to have a guy like Hagen Smith, who was a big-time recruit coming out of high school, turn down a lot of money in that MLB draft, to come to Arkansas and really take his game to another level and see it reflect. I mean, he signed for $8 million. We don't pocket watch here on this program, but that's a big deal, and that's a big thing to show your recruits, any left-handed pitcher in the country, hey, we just had the best one in the country who signed for $8 million. You want to do that? Come here. So, I mean, you just go on down the list. I mean, Pyton Stova, a guy we expected to get drafted pretty highly. He goes in the 117th overall pick in the 4th round, a little bit later than we maybe thought. Mason Molina gets drafted. Brady Tiger gets drafted later. Jake Faraday is one who we thought might have a chance to come back to Arkansas, but he ends up going in the 11th round. So, I mean, there's maybe one quote unquote negative variable for Arkansas, but other than that, I mean, Hudson White, Ben McLaughlin, Jared Spraglott, Mason Molina, like I mentioned, none of these were like out of the blue surprises that nobody expected to see coming. And I think one of the big ones, the big developments there, Carson Wiggins, if that name sounds familiar to you, it probably should, because his older brother Jackson was pitching for Arkansas just a few years ago. We didn't get to see the final version of Jackson Wiggins in his Arkansas career as he tore his UCL going into his junior year. So his little brother, who, frankly, John, I'll be honest with you, I didn't expect to make it to campus. I didn't expect to ever cover him at Arkansas. He was like a consensus top 100 draft prospect coming out of high school. He ends up saying, hey, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to go to Fayetteville and see what I can do. And I believe he will be draft eligible after his sophomore year. So, but to kind of look at that, but I think this is a big deal. I think it it went well for Arkansas. You had a little bit of everything. You had some of your top players getting drafted, which is good for your program, but didn't get gutted. And I think one of the bigger headlines coming away from the MLB draft was Kendall Diggs is back at Arkansas. And I know a lot of fans, he's a fan favorite. Didn't have the year he wanted to have as a junior. He was battling some injuries, and we found out it was a pretty bad injury there. But I think that was massive, man. I don't know how much more Arkansas could have realistically asked out of the MLB draft.
Yeah, and I was even thinking about just starting with the pitching side of things too with Matt Hobbs. Dave Van Horn's had a really good run of assistant coaches. I mean, for crying out loud, like we've talked about many times, that 2017 year, I guess he's got two assistant coaches that now are both head coaches of major SEC programs, and one of them just won the College World Series with Vitello. So he's always been known for that. But having a guy like Matt Hobbs, and as consistently as he's been, Arkansas, they've had great pitchers in their history under Dave Van Horn, but it certainly seems like the past 5, 6, 7 years that Matt Hobbs has been a part of the program, you can count on not only great recruiting, but great development. And a guy like Hagen Smith, I mean, he was a highly regarded kid coming out of high school, but to see him actually live up to that expectation, get better each year, and have one of the best type of pitching seasons you could have this past year, I mean, that's just got to make it so much easier for Van Horn and for Matt Hobbs walking into these recruits' homes and just being like, hey, I know you may want to go pro, or you may think you're ready for the pros, but if you come here, there's all these reasons and all these lists of things that I can do for you and get you ready for the MLB and make you a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, I think that had to be something that went through the mind of Carson Wiggins when he's sitting there. I mean, because Hagen Smith, he's a guy who 3 years ago was in a very similar situation. He was a top 150 prospect. A lot of people thought he had a chance to be one of the better high school pitchers in his draft class, thought he might go. He kind of took that decision to bet on himself and go to Arkansas. We see how well it worked out for him. Obviously, he didn't have the team success he wanted to have there in that last year. But I mean, in terms of individual development, I don't know if there's a better development track record story than Hagen Smith and what Matt Hobbs is able to do with him. And so I think that's a huge deal, man. I mean, even a guy like Jake Faraday, who I mentioned there, that got drafted in the 11th round, this is a guy that threw 2 innings combined in his first 2 years at Arkansas, doesn't transfer when he could have probably gone a lot of places and had a nice year, had a little bit more of a pivotal role. He just keeps working, keeps developing. He has a really nice junior year, and then all of a sudden he signs for $200,000. I didn't have $200,000 whenever I left college. I'm sure there's a lot of college pitchers who would like to have something like that. And I think it's really good for the program when you have guys like that who, obviously Hagen Smith is a huge name. Everyone knows him. Hagen Smith would have been Hagen Smith no matter where he went. But I think having guys like that and Jake Faraday who had that development and trusted the process and saw it work out for them. And I just don't think there's many teams around the country, I'd have to check, that can say they had their entire starting rotation drafted also. And I mean, having Brady Tigert and Mason Molina, who Brady Tigert probably fell further than he expected to fall. But it's really rare to see 3 high-level arms like that all get drafted. And I think it's a testament to what Matt Hobbs has done at Arkansas. And that's why D1 Baseball has him as the assistant coach of the year.
And before we move on to, I wanted to bring this up because I know I'm not trying to look at it in a negative way because everything's hindsight and everything works out. But, Pyton Stova, we all know, like coming out of your home state, or at least state you're from with Louisiana, is one of the top prospects. It was pretty shocking when he decided to come to Arkansas, dealt with some injuries and everything. But do you feel like his time at Arkansas, did that help him? Did that hurt him where his draft stock was? I mean, again, you never want to hate a kid for making a decision because Razorback fans love the fact that he came here. But was that something that maybe because of the injuries and because of all that, you may have been better suited at leaving a little bit early than staying 3 years in college?
Who knows? I mean, in hindsight, I mean, you look at where Stovall was one of those guys. He was a little bit of a late bloomer during his senior year of high school, where he kind of, jumped up the charts there towards the closer to the draft, where kind of almost came out of nowhere, where all of a sudden he was in that top 150, 200 range. All of a sudden now some people were saying, oh, he's the best high school hitter in the entire class. Those are some of the things we heard. It's hard to say. I mean, I think the injuries probably affected his draft stock and kind of where he stood in scouts' eyes more than anything. But I mean, we're still talking about a guy who was drafted in the 4th round, signed for $625,000. That's a little bit above the slot for his value. So I don't think he regrets his decision too bad. And I mean, frankly, I mean, DVH talks about it as well. NIL has changed college baseball a good bit. So it's not the only compensation these guys are getting as their draft signing bonuses. So I don't think Pyton Stova has any regrets about how it played out. And I think that's another thing where it's not always going to be the Hagen Smith thing where you develop and turn into a top 10 pick. But I think if you ask Pyton Stova, I don't think he has any doubts about whether or not he made the right decision.
We'll talk about some of the notable additions for Dave Van Horn and his squad coming up next. So stay with us here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. Right, Razorback fans, we know that it's that time of year where you're talking about going to concerts, talking about going to comedy shows, talking about going all that. Well, if you're going to do it, you better do it with the Gametime app, because with the Gametime app, it makes the ticket finding process so much easier, because you have to have tickets to go to these events. I know you want to walk in there for free, but that's not how it works. So you got to download the app, because not only do they have all the different events that you're looking to choose from, whether it's sports, comedy shows, or anything like that, but they're also going to give you last minute deals where you can save up to 60% off by buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. You can also save more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats for you. They have all different types of things to save you money. And one of the best features that they have is the all-in pricing. So the price that you see in the very beginning is the price you pay. There's not a lot of hidden fees that go through the process. It gives you for it right up front. And they also have the lowest price guarantee, where if they find someplace else that they were cheaper, they're going to credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your very first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so moving on into the next segment of the Locked On Razorbacks Bombastic Edition. We can know about some notable additions, because every year, Andrew, we know Dave Van Horn's going to have some really good players joining his squad. It's kind of what he does. But who are some of the most notable additions to this next year's team?
So I know everyone who's listening, every Arkansas baseball fan who, wanted to see what this team was going to do this offseason. I'm sure they had a lot of hitters in mind, but I do want to start with the pitching staff. Arkansas only brought in 3 Division I transfers for their pitching staff, but it's about as good a trio as you can possibly have. So they go, the one that the headliner, the one that jumps out, Zach Root from ECU. I'm not saying Arkansas is going to have a Hagen Smith on their roster this year. I'm not saying they're ever going to have another Hagen Smith on their roster ever, a pitcher of that caliber. But seeing Zach Root throw, it's going to remind guys a lot of Hagen Smith, that left-handed fastball that'll get up to 96, 97, fastball slider combo. He had a really big year at ECU, and he's one of the top, left-handed prospects in his college draft class and in his junior year this year. I think he's got a good chance to be Arkansas's ace. Frankly, Gabe Gackle will probably have something to say about that. Maybe Gage Wood will have something to say about that. But Zach Root, ECU, had a 3.56 ERA last year, 76 strikeouts, 68 innings. Big time piece, and I feel like one of the most notable. I mean, I believe he was listed as a top 3 transfer by every outlet you could imagine. Huge, big time piece that I feel like Arkansas had to kind of pony up to get. They also brought in a guy. I'm hoping I'm not botching this guy's name. I have not heard a reputable source say his name, but he's from Ohio State. His first name is Landon, and his last name, I'm going to say it, Beidelshees.
Sounds great to me.
I mean, when you guys see it spelled, you'll kind of, you can make up your own thing. I'll have to get with Phil Elson and talk to him about, hey, what's the official pronunciation of this thing? Which pronunciations of Arkansas baseball have been all over the place here lately. But he's a little bit more of a safer bet, where he's lefty, low 90s fastball, a little bit in the Mason Molina-esque in terms of stuff and what he brings to the table. But he had a really solid year last year at Ohio State, had a 4.15 ERA through 84 2/3 innings. He's got like 120, 125 innings under his belt as a collegiate pitcher. So a lot of experience. You assume that's the kind of guy you probably want as a Sunday starter in the SEC. So you think about those two guys, add in with a guy like Gabe Gackle, who's one of the more talented guys in the country. I just said Arkansas got their whole rotation drafted last year. They're set up to do something pretty similar with this group right here, and these 2 transfer additions are going to help there. They also brought in a kid, Aiden Jimenez from Oregon State, who is coming off Tommy John surgery, but he's like a pretty well-known prospect coming into his freshman year at Oregon State. Threw a little bit in 2023. We'll see if they're able to get him back from injury. But let's just go right over to the position player side. I want to start with the outfield, because we just mentioned that Kendall Diggs is coming back, which was not really something anyone expected. And Arkansas actually added another outfielder, Carson Hansen, who they ended up kind of having to change plans. He's now at Kentucky now, which I think is a direct result of Kendall Diggs coming back. But Arkansas goes to TCU and gets a kid, Logan Maxwell, who hit 300 as a sophomore at TCU, hit 335 last year, doesn't have a ton of home runs, only has 5 career home runs to his name. He's more of your get-on-base type of guy. I know there's so many Hog fans who have been kind of clamoring for something like that. We were tired of the home run or bust thing. So this guy gets on base a good bit, doesn't have a ton of pop. So we'll see if, they have him at the top of the lineup, maybe the 9 hole. but seems like an older, experienced outfielder that you can count on. They also brought in a guy, you're going to love this name, John, Rocco Pepi. Rocco Pepi, Roccopeppi. He seems awesome. Everybody calls him Juice Box. He seems like one of those guys with a lot of personality, a lot of energy. All his teammates love him. He started his career at Long Beach State and then went to Fresno State, where he had the best year of his career last year. Hit 327 with 14 home runs last year. Hits 309 for his career. So a lot of experience, a lot of legitimate Division I games under his belt. We'll see if both of those guys end up being surefire starters, because the guy I'm about to mention next, I think, is the best outfield transfer they got. Charles Davalon from Florida Gulf Coast. Coming off his freshman year, he hit 284, 10 home runs, 13 stolen bases. Numbers might not blow you away, but there's a lot of scouts that feel like this kid is really projectable, and he's probably my bet to start at center field for Arkansas. He's, like I said, coming off his freshman year, he's draft eligible as a sophomore, so could very well be at Arkansas for 1 year, but there's been some buzz about him, like he's maybe going to be a top 2 or 3 round pick. So I think that's a sneaky diamond in the rough that Arkansas picked up. And so you bring in 3 transfer outfielders. You've got one guy that was your everyday right fielder coming back. Arkansas should be in a situation to improve their outfield across the board. So we feel pretty good about that. And then just touching on some of these infield transfers real quick. If there's one criticism I have of the transfer class Arkansas has put together, it's that they didn't really get that lockdown corner infielder, that first baseman who's going to hit 20 home runs or something like that. I feel like there's not really a guy like that in this class, but Arkansas goes to Vanderbilt and gets a kid, Camden Koziel, who is honestly, he reminds me a lot of Nolan Souza in the way that they both play second base, third base, maybe a little shortstop if you want to get crazy. Both left-handed bats with a lot of power and projection. And both of these guys were huge prospects in their respect. I mean, they were in the same class, both massive recruits. Koziel hit 284 at Vanderbilt, only hit 5 home runs, was kind of in and out of the lineup a little bit, similar to Souza at Arkansas. So I imagine both of those guys are going to be kind of the X factors of the infield of, are they going to take that next step and be everyday players? We'll see. Arkansas obviously added Vahiva Aloy's brother, Kahio Aloy, who had a pretty nice freshman year at BYU, and now he comes over. Obviously, really talented family. We'll see if that works out. And then they brought in a guy, Michael Anderson from Rhode Island, who I just said fans were clamoring for the on-base guy, the guy who's not going to be home run or bust. If you're that fan, you're not going to like Michael Anderson because he is home run or bust. He has 23 home runs in his 2 collegiate seasons, hit over 300 as a freshman, and his batting average dipped to 250 last year. He hit a ton of home runs in both seasons. I think he's more closer to that 250 range, but I do think he's got legitimate power. He showed a little bit of that in the Cape Cod League this year. So we'll see if Arkansas is able to maybe tap into that and get him back to more of his freshman year where he's a little bit more consistent on base, but brought in a guy with a lot of power, which I felt like this lineup needed. And the last guy I'm going to mention is Elliot Peterson, who they brought in. Ryder Helfrich had a really good summer in the Cape, and you expect him to be the starting catcher for Arkansas as a sophomore. Elliot Peterson, coming from the Southeast Community JUCO ranks, which I know people hear JUCO and they kind of scoff a little bit. The kid hit 517 at JUCO. I don't care what level of baseball you're at. If you hit 517, I'm going to go ahead and give you the benefit of the doubt. I think he can swing a little bit. So I feel like Arkansas, they've plugged in a lot of holes. This might not be the class of position players that really blow everyone away, but I really think they answered a lot of questions this offseason. And frankly, I like the team that they've put together, at least on paper.
Well, that'll do it for the Locked On Razorbacks Bombastic Edition. For Andrew Ellis, I'm John Neighbors. Same sports show, same sports channel tomorrow afternoon. Have a great rest of your day, everybody, and we will see you then.